Coming to the prelims pointer section, we have the very first topic which talks about the Chagos deal. See, in geography, we have the nomenclature of archipelago, which means a group of islands. In the Indian Ocean, we have a group of islands known as the Chagos Archipelago. Now, Chagos Archipelago is occupied by Britishers since the time it was colonized by them. Recently, there was an agreement which was reached between the Britishers and the Mauritius government that there would be the transfer of sovereignty of the Chagos Archipelago to the Mauritius government, Mauritius people, except the atoll or the island of Diego Garcia. For that, there is a kind of 99 years lease in the agreement which has been mentioned. Why? Because Diego Garcia is an atoll, is an island which houses the US-UK naval base in the Indian Ocean, and it's of a very strategic importance for both these countries, especially the US. Now, what has happened is US has intervened in this part, and it is basically asking the UK not to conclude this particular agreement, right? And therefore, this becomes important, can be asked in the prelims. A bill operationalizing the UK-Mauritius Treaty, which recognizes the sovereignty of Mauritius over the Chagos Archipelago, is currently on hold in the British Parliament while London holds discussions with Washington. The Indian Ocean Islands are home to Diego Garcia, which houses a joint UK-US military base. The treaty signed in May 2025 would transfer the sovereignty over the archipelago to Mauritius, while the UK would be given a 99-year lease for Diego Garcia and pay Mauritius an average annual amount of Great Britain pounds 101 million annual amount. The US President Donald Trump, who earlier backed the treaty, changed his position and publicly called for its consideration because he is fickle-minded, and he then said that it can have effect on US interests because you have the US base over there. Mr. Trump said Diego Garcia should not be given away and suggested that it may be needed in the event US strike on Iran, right? So again, of very strategic importance for the US. Now, this is what you can just understand. We have India, and this is the Indian Ocean. Over here, we have the Chagos Archipelago, right? And the sovereignty, according to the agreement, would be transferred back to the Mauritius, except the atoll of Diego Garcia, which has been taken for a lease of 99 years. Chagos Archipelago Island Group in the central Indian Ocean, located about 1,600 kilometers south of the southern tip of Indian subcontinent, has been co-terminus with the British Indian Ocean Territory, BIOT, right? Because it has been occupied by the Britishers. Lying at the center of the Indian Ocean and out of the path of cyclonic storms, the archipelago is strategically located. It constitutes a semicircular group open to east, comprising Solomon Islands and the other islands. This is important. Diego Garcia Atoll, the largest square miles and southernmost landmass in the group, and the location of a major UK-US military base. History, you can also just go through this. It is basically administered through the Foreign Office, Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office in London. Although there is no permanent civilian population on the islands, generally about 4,000 US and British military and contract civilian personnel are stationed there. The islands, which were uninhabited when they were discovered by the Portuguese explorer in 16th century, were situated on the international trade routes and became the focus of competing claims by European powers. In the 18th century, the France took possessions of the Chagos Archipelago and Seychelles as dependencies of Mauritius, and coconut plantations were established to produce copra. Slaves were imported from Africa to work in the plantations. In the early 19th century, the British took over the islands. Mauritius and its dependencies were officially proclaimed a colony of Britain in 1814 under the Treaty of Paris. Seychelles was later detached from the Mauritius and became a separate colony of the Britain in 1903. During the Cold War, agreement between the governments of the Britain and the United States led to the creation of 1965 British Indian Ocean Territory for the purpose of establishing defense and communications facilities to counterbalance the Soviet military presence. So primarily it was to counter the Soviet expansion, right? The new territory comprised the Aldabara Islands and the other islands, formerly part of the Seychelles colony, along with the Chagos Archipelago, which had formerly been part of the Mauritius colony. A major UK-US military facility was built on Diego Garcia in 1971, and the plantations were there closed, right? So that is what you'll have to understand. There was a kind of a forceful evacuation of people, and it was then taken for the creation of, for the establishment of military base. Expansion of the military facilities during the 1970s and 80s was opposed by the neighboring states, who viewed the base as compromising the non-militarized status of the Indian Ocean region. Numerous airstrikes were launched from the Diego Garcia during the Persian Gulf War, and the US led attacks on Afghanistan and the initial phase of the Iraq War. You can just see we have Chagos Archipelago and then we have Diego Garcia. I think this would be better for the understanding part. We have sovereignty status and the treaty developments. Discussion about the legality of the British government's action in the 1960s and 70s regarding the Chagos Archipelago rose to the fore again when the United Nations General Assembly formally requested in 2017 that UN's judicial organ, the ICJ, International Court of Justice, tell me the headquarters of ICJ, where they are located, render an advisory opinion on whether the decolonization of Mauritius with regard to the Chagos Archipelago had been lawfully completed and on what consequences under the international law of British rule over the Chagos Archipelago were. During the proceedings, the Mauritius stated that it had been forced to give up the islands of the Chagos Archipelago in exchange for its independence in 1968. The ICJ's ruling, which came in February 2019, found that the decolonization process had been illegal and the recommendations that the UK and its administration of the Chagos Archipelago as soon as possible, which would open the way for the return of islands to Mauritius. As it was an advisory ruling, it was non-binding, although it did carry a significant international weight. A tentative agreement, which we concluded in which Britishers and Mauritius concluded in May 2025, to resolve the dispute were announced in October 2024, and a final treaty transfer sovereignty to Mauritius was signed in May 2025. But again, now US has intervened primarily to protect its interests in the Diego Garcia. The treaty still awaits primary and secondary legislation before entering into force. This is a map which is, again, can be read. We have the Great Chagos Bank and we have the Chagos Archipelago. There's numerous islands over here, and this is Diego Garcia of strategic importance, part of the Chagos Archipelago. This is what you need to understand with respect to this particular article. Let's go to the next one.